Since the outbreak of full-scale war in 2022, the United States Congress has authorized roughly $175 billion to support the Ukrainian war effort. It is an astronomical sum of money, intended to supply weapons, prop up the domestic economy, and sustain the state through a crisis. But this chart shows a severe discrepancy in the pipeline. Of the $175 billion authorized, President Zelensky reports only around $76 billion actually reached Ukraine. The remainder was absorbed by American industrial contracts, government activities, and administrative overhead. Even the aid that does cross the border is difficult to trace, raising major questions about accountability. The Pentagon's Inspector General admitted failing to maintain accurate serial number inventories for over $1 billion in military gear, citing the chaos of a war zone. At the same time, domestic watchdogs are sounding alarms. Volodymyr Boyko, the veteran of the Russian-Ukrainian war, published a report claiming that a network of local public activists embezzled 797 million Ukrainian hryvnia, tens of millions of dollars, in international technical assistance in a single year. The combination of international tracking failures and domestic embezzlement claims points directly toward a massive institutional accountability black hole. Billions of dollars are vanishing into the gaps of a system that lacks the basic infrastructure to monitor its own spending. This lack of oversight stands in stark contrast to the platform that built the current administration. Before 2019, Zelensky was a television comedian whose most famous role was a high school teacher going viral for a furious rant against corrupt politicians. He turned that fictional populist anger into a real-world campaign. Running entirely as an outsider with zero political background, he promised to end the reign of the billionaire oligarchs who had controlled the country since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Voters, exhausted by systemic fraud, handed him a 73% landslide victory. His immediate mandate was to clean house. He promised to strip government officials of their political immunity, arguing the threat of real, inescapable prison time was the only way to stop politicians from treating the state budget like a personal bank account. 5 years later, the administration that rose on the promise of dismantling the old system is now struggling under the weight of its own scandals, facing major allegations of missing funds and war profiteering within its inner circle. To understand where the money goes, we have to look at the organizations tasked with receiving it. Boyko's report specifically targets several dozen individuals leading prominent civil society NGOs, groups that brand themselves as the watchdogs of Ukrainian democracy. This data visualization breaks down where that 797 million hryvnia allegedly went in 2025. The largest recipients of this international technical assistance were the Center for Economic Strategy at 120 million, Transparency International Ukraine at 88 million, the Zmina Human Rights Center at 82 million, and the Anti-Corruption Action Center at 51 million. The Anti-Corruption Action Center, or ANTAC, provides a highly specific example of how this money is managed. According to the Veterans Report, ANTAC's owners include Vitaly Shabunin, who faced criminal charges for fraud and evading military service, and Daria Kaleniuk, who allegedly used forged documents in the early days of the Russian invasion to smuggle her husband out of the country to hide him from military mobilization. Groups operating under the banner of anti-corruption have secured immense international funding. Yet, rather than securing the state's resources, the label itself acts as a lucrative shield, allowing a specific class of connected elites to profit while avoiding the physical and financial costs of the war. Because Zelensky ran as a true outsider, he took office without an established political party or a roster of experienced policymakers. To fill the void, he appointed dozens of loyal friends, screenwriters, and executives from his television production company, Quartel 95, to top roles in national security, defense, and intelligence. The consequences of running a state via a show business network became glaringly apparent during the Energoatom scandal. Ukraine's Independent Anti-Corruption Bureau, NABO, accused Quartel 95 co-founder Timur Mindich of orchestrating a massive war profiteering scheme. Mindich and his associates allegedly skimmed 15% off contracts meant to build concrete air raid defenses for Energoatom, the state nuclear energy body. The defenses were never built, leaving critical infrastructure exposed to Russian strikes. Just hours before Nabu raided his apartment, Mindich fled to Israel, leaving behind stacks of cash and a golden toilet. These extraction schemes thrive in the blind spots identified by the Pentagon audit. With severe personnel limitations for monitors and strict restrictions on movement within a war zone, it is physically impossible for international donors to verify if the defense contract actually results in poured concrete. The promise to strip political immunity never materialized. Instead, the legal protections afforded to government officials, combined with the extreme fog of war, created the ultimate structural shield. Connected insiders can siphon aid, leave infrastructure defenseless, and flee the country with zero legal consequences. In the first weeks of the invasion, Zelensky's approval rating hit 91%. Today, that unity has fractured. Troops and veterans report going unpaid and lacking adequate health care on the front lines, while they watch politicians and connected contractors extract millions in aid money behind them. The administration's sheer political inexperience ultimately forced them to rely on the exact people they promised to defeat. To maintain domestic stability, the government struck quiet deals with powerful billionaires like Ihor Kolomoisky, allowing them to retain their monopolies in exchange for funding local militias and basic state services. With domestic resources drained by embezzlement and the state unable to fund its own defense, Ukraine became profoundly dependent on foreign cash. As U.S. and European aid became the nation's primary lifeline, the country's strategic direction shifted increasingly toward the interests of its international donors. Relying on a patchwork of oligarchic networks and foreign dependencies hollows out a state. When a government cannot pay its own troops or audit its own nuclear defenses, it functionally loses the ability to govern itself. When institutions refuse to transparently track billions of dollars, they create an information void. And in the absence of hard data, geopolitical paranoia and organized disinformation rapidly fill the gap. The confusion and lack of accountability surrounding the conflict have grown so extreme that intelligence analysts are now tracking online networks linking the war to medieval apocalyptic prophecies, framing the geopolitical disruption as the literal end of the world. The trajectory of the current administration provides a harsh lesson. Electing an outsider with good intentions does not cure systemic fraud. True democratic governance requires rigorous, tedious institutional transparency and the political will to prosecute your own allies. Wartime conditions provide a unique cover for the extraction of state resources, effectively turning the machinery of national defense against the very people it was built to protect.